Chapter 1161, Countdown.
Well done.
Faced with Eamon's praise, Klein forced a smile and politely replied,
Thank you.
To be honest, he preferred to hear curses rather than praise, as that meant that he was close to succeeding. Of course, Klein suspected that even if he managed to escape, Eamon wouldn't be flustered and exasperated. Based on the character displayed by this god of mischief, it was very likely that he found it interesting and exciting while also inevitably feeling a little depressed and disappointed to the point of being eager for the next round. Eamon smiled indifferently.
It's a huge improvement to be able to think of using door to disrupt me, but don't you think that I'd be in a relatively more vigilant state while door opening, and that it's actually not that easy to be affected by an accident?
After some thought, Klein answered seriously.
That's what I thought in the beginning, but later on I felt that you should be able to grasp my state of mind, believing that I wouldn't dare to act when you open the door. When that happens, making an attempt might work wonders.
Doing it when others believed that you wouldn't do it was also a strategy. In his previous life, Klein had come into contact with games that had such a higher level of thinking that made his head spin. Eamon said with a smile as he used his knuckle to nudge the bottom of his monocle.
What if I thought of this level as well?
At the same time, the remaining marionettes, which were still alive, took out crystal monocles out of thin air and wore them on their right eye. All of them cast their gazes at Klein. This left Klein's scalp tingling. He discovered that the connection between the marionettes and himself had instantly been severed. With a smile, Eamon turned around and walked towards the cathedral.
Although you've improved, failure still demands some level of punishment.
As he took a step forward, the marionettes revealed smiles, one after another, as they collapsed to the ground stiffly. This caused Klein's soul to be torn apart again and again, as the blood vessels on his forehead visibly bulged. As he endured the pain, he stood rooted to the ground and calmed down after a long while. During this process, although he had always been in the depths of the darkness, he didn't suffer any attacks from the terrifying monsters, nor did he turn into a concealed state.
When did Amon steal the concealment powers in this city? If I had tried to commit suicide, I definitely would have had the thought stolen from me. My preparations still aren't enough. I don't have enough confidence when dealing with Eamon, having not considered the things he might have stolen into consideration. I really didn't expect him to release the day that he stole from the ruins of the battlefield of gods. Regarding what else he stole in the past, or whatever he has on him, I have no idea. I can't make targeted preparations. That monocle is some sort of vessel used to store stolen items? Or is it part of Amon to begin with? So every time he parasitizes someone, a monocle will be taken out.
Klein rubbed his temples and walked into the cathedral. Looking at Amon before the door of light, he asked, seemingly casual,
Why do you have so many monocles? Where do you usually place them?
Eamon stroked the monocle on his right eye and smiled indifferently.
Why don't you ask me why every avatar of mine has eyes? And where do I usually place them?
Klein nodded in enlightenment.
I understand.
Eamon cast his gaze back to the door of light that had yet to calm down from the rippling. He casually said,
I have the nagging feeling that this operation of yours is a major preparation piece, and not an attempt. What cheap trick did you pull off during that process?
After some deliberation, Klein replied with a smile.
Guess.
Eamon asked with interest as he pinched the edge of his monocle.
I do have some guesses. Do you think I've guessed it correctly?
Perhaps, or perhaps not.
Klein didn't give a clear answer as he cooperatively walked to Eamon's side. He saw him reach out again and press down on the pale white door of light. Above the door of light, ripples appeared once again as they became more intense and exaggerated. After about 10 seconds, the ripples spread the surroundings, causing the door of light to expand twice in size. Eamon glanced at Klein, gesturing for him to take a step forward. Klein instinctively turned his head and looked around the cathedral. Beyonder characteristics left behind by the mutated monsters were shimmering outside the area that the lantern had lit up. They weren't all Beyonders when they were alive. After those ordinary people turned into monsters, A large part of the power came from the darkness and degeneration. The powers didn't belong to them, so no characteristics were purged. After taking a look together with Klein, Eamon suddenly shook his head and smiled.
I almost forgot.
Just as he finished his sentence, a bunch of Beyonder characteristics floated up and entered his body. They merged with him, leaving only a small portion behind. Eamon said casually, as he retracted his gaze.
Most of the people who chose to transform into monsters are of the apprentice pathway, Beyonders, and their family members who can enter the city's dark side.
Even if it's a similar pathway's Beyonder characteristic, it would be problematic if it's directly eaten, right? Shouldn't it only be possible to jump to a higher level of a neighboring pathway? It also allows the accommodation of lower sequences.
Seeing this, Klein was a little stunned as he asked curiously,
Won't this accumulate madness?
This wasn't just a matter of accumulating madness. Klein suspected that if he did it himself, there was a high chance that he would go crazy.
Others will,
Eamon said with a smile.
but not me.
A true bug.
Klein couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Then, the distance between him and the door of light disappeared. Subconsciously, he forgot about the remaining death pathways Beyonder characteristics, and he entered the mutated door of light with Eamon. Endless darkness and squirming lines of light were mixed together, giving rise to the feeling of a sudden descent. About 10 seconds later, he discovered that he and Eamon had appeared on a square. The dim yellow light of the animal hide lantern seemed to be stopped by an invisible force, causing it to only illuminate half the square. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the surroundings. With the help of the lightning, Klein saw several incomplete statues erected around the square. They either had their hands tied to their backs, had their bodies entangled with the thorny roses, or looked like mummies. They gave off the feeling of being restrained. Like a qualified tour guide, Eamon introduced the situation of each scenic site to Klein.
This city first believed in the mutant king. They're very interesting. They're usually restrained and quiet, just like ascetics. However, once they encounter prey, or in special moments in time, they will release a bloodthirsty desire to kill. You can imagine that on the night of the full moon, this is a city where werewolves roam.
From the looks of it, the mutants originally had the concept of temperance. Later on, it was led astray by the Mother Tree of Desire.
Using the new round of lightning, Klein took a few more looks and asked thoughtfully,
The mutant king's image is close to that of a mummy?
No. Although he is an ugly and twisted man, he likes to entangle himself with thorny roses.
Eamon scoffed. Klein took the opportunity to ask,
What kind of idols will your believers worship? In mysticism, your symbol is a clock and a worm of time.
Eamon scratched his chin and said,
In theory, my believers are all me. I don't need to trouble myself with building an idol.
My believers are all me. Thankfully, I have a blessed like Danitz now.
Klein suddenly realized that he was quite similar to Eamon in certain aspects.
Of course, when I say my believers myself, it's a funny story. When Eamon says that my believers are all me, it becomes a horror novel. The difference in style is quite huge.
Klein finally mocked himself. As Eamon walked forward, he continued,
However, in my father's era, quite a number of people believed in me. Some of them set off with the name Angel of Time, using the emblem of the clock to construct my idol. Some of them used the title of God of Mischief and used a crow covered in mysterious patterns as my image, while others combined the two together.
Having said that, the monocled Eamon suddenly turned his head and glanced at Klein before curling his lips.
We're less than 3 days away from our final destination.
That is to say, I only have 3 days left.
Klein nearly drew in a cold breath of air. The pressure increased rapidly, making him feel as though his nerves were being crushed. He had yet to determine the true purpose behind this game Eamon made, nor did he discover any traces of what he was being driven to do. This meant that he was unable to grasp the key, and he was unable to find a real opportunity to escape. The performance of Eamon's avatar made him understand that he might not even be able to last 10 seconds before him. As his thoughts raced, Klein fell silent. Following that, he walked out of the square covered in ruins. There were few pedestrians on the streets as they came and went in a hurry. In Pritz Harbor, where many houses were covered in bum marks, the chestnut-haired Queen Mystic placed a newspaper on the table. The first page of the Tussock Times was about the king's assassination. It also claimed that the assassin came from Fasak or Intis.
This isn't stopping the disaster, nor is it worsening the disaster.
Bernadette muttered to herself with a serious expression. She pondered for a moment, picked up the cloth on the table, and wrapped it up. Then she released her fingers and allowed it to relax. This time, the coffee cups, pens, newspapers, and other items in the tablecloth disappeared. What appeared were ritual items like silver-made candles. Following that, Bernadette held a ritual and summoned Gehrman Sparrow's messenger. As a partner, she felt that she needed to ask about the other party's situation and see if there was anything else she needed to help with. The moment the ritual ended, 4 blonde, red-eyed heads walked out of the burgeoning candle flame. Dressed in a dark and complicated long dress, Renette Teneker's neck was empty. Bernadette's eyelids twitched indiscernibly before she picked up the letter and gold coin that she had prepared earlier and handed it to the messenger. One of Renette Teneker's heads bid on the letter and gold coin while the other head sized up Queen Mystic for a few seconds. She shifted her gaze back and walked into the void. However, just as Bernadette was about to put away the tablecloth, Miss Messenger suddenly appeared again. One of the 2 heads with blonde hair and red eyes spoke one after another.
He has disappeared.
Chapter 1162. Prophecy. Gehrman Sparrow has gone missing. Bernadette had a vague sense of foreboding when the abnormally terrifying messenger returned. She had roughly figured out what had happened. Therefore, after hearing the other party's response, her expression sank slightly. There was no obvious reaction. Queen Mystic's blue eyes, which resembled a condensing sea, instantly turned darker. They temporarily lost focus, as though she was looking at a torrent of fate through Renette Teneker. 2 to 3 seconds later, Bernadette suddenly closed her eyes, as if a blinding light had appeared in front of her. Blood-red liquid trickled from the corner of her eyes, accentuating her pale face. With her eyes tightly shut, Bernadette said, in a slightly ethereal voice,
Gehrman Sparrow is in grave danger. Darkness is devouring the light, leaving behind only a sliver of hope.
This was a prophecy. The sequence 3 of the Mystery Prior Pathway was clairvoyant. The 4 heads held by Renette Teneker spoke one after another.
What does darkness symbolize?
Bernadette maintained her composure and said,
Desolation, aberration, apocalypse, negativity, error.
Renette Teneker, who was wearing a dark and complicated long dress, didn't let the head in her hand speak any further. Throwing down the letter and gold coin, she turned and walked into the void, disappearing into the room. Queen Mystic Bernadette stood rooted to the ground for a few seconds without moving. Finally, she opened her eyes again. Her blue eyes were hazy and lifeless, as though she needed more time to restore her eyesight. Bernadette thought for a moment and reached out her right hand. The tablecloth was stowed away before being spread open once again. The ritual items were replaced with a fountain pen, paper, and ink bottle. The fountain pen suddenly leaped up, as if it was held by an invisible sprite. It quickly wrote down the matter of Gehrman Sparrow's disappearance onto the paper. In the captain's cabin of the future. Despite looking at the fried mushrooms on her plate and taking in the fragrance of the fat, Cattleya didn't pick up her cutlery for a long time. Suddenly, her spiritual perception was triggered. She turned her head to look at the spot where the brass sextant was placed, and she realized that a letter had appeared there at some point in time. Cattleya immediately revealed a smile as she reached out to pick up the letter and eagerly began reading it. Gradually, she frowned.
Gehrman Sparrow has gone missing.
Cattleya repeated the key point of the letter in a low voice. She acutely felt that this matter was somewhat serious. She easily understood the meaning behind Queen Mystic's letter. Without any hesitation, she bowed her head, clasped her hands, and recited an honorific name in ancient Hermes.
The fool that doesn't belong to this era.
Above the gray fog, the crimson star representing the hermit came alive. It began expanding and contracting, spreading out ripples of prayers. They intertwined with the ripples created by the two crimson stars that corresponded to the magician and the sun. They surged towards the ancient and majestic palace, like tidal waves.
Someone is praying to Mr. Fool again. The echoes are getting even stronger, and the sound is becoming more clear. I can hear it clearly. And the image is also clearer. This prayer seems to be from Ma'am Hermit. Only she likes to wear ancient warlock robes. Queen Mystic discovered that something has happened to Gehrman Sparrow. Although I was worried that I would die this time and needed a certain amount of time to revive, I had already hinted to the members of the Tarot Club that I might cancel the gathering next week. But that was just a hint. It wasn't a formal notice, nor was it clear enough. When Monday comes, they'll definitely panic, pray, and try to make contact, only to discover that Mr. Fool has also disappeared. No, he has run off with the world.
Klein used a deprecating comment to ease his feelings. He glanced at Amon, who was walking beside him. Without a word, he lifted the lantern in his hand and said,
"It should have been extinguished long ago."
Wearing a pointed hat and black mage robe, Amon nodded slightly and said,
I left it in a magical state. It can maintain its light for a week without needing any fuel.
Klein thought for a moment and asked,
Is this the deceiving of natural laws?
Amon turned his head and used his monocled right eye to look at Klein for a second before smiling.
Smart. The Error Pathways Sequence 3 is a more profound version of Swindler, known as Mentor of Deceit.
It's about the same as my guess. However, it isn't only the error pathway that can do such a thing. The Black Emperor can use distortion and exploit powers to achieve that.
In his mind, Klein began comparing the differences between the Marauder and the Lawyer pathway. At this moment, Amon stroked his chin and asked with interest,
There are less than 3 days left. If you don't think of a way to escape, it will be too late. Do you plan on making a new attempt tomorrow?
Make a guess.
Klein forced a smile as he answered in the same rhetoric manner that Amon was best at using. To be honest, he didn't believe that the effects would be better given more attempts. On the one hand, frequent attempts were indeed able to test the limits of Amon's powers. By expending the items that he had previously stolen, Klein could establish a good foundation for the final battle. But on the other hand, he would also expose his trump cards. After all, he was in a passive state and had no chance to prepare. To force Amon to showcase more of the means available to him, it required him to use the few trump cards he had. If his countermeasures were all figured out by Amon after his repeated attempts, he wouldn't have any chance of escaping. An attempt to escape was a double-edged sword. If one wasn't careful, one would cut oneself. It was precisely because of this that Klein didn't blindly take action and carefully made plans in his heart. As he spoke, he walked out of the city that originally worshipped the Mutant King and later believed in the ancient sun god. There were only white bones in several stone structures that had been weathered by the elements here that showcased its former prosperity. Outside the city, there was an endless wilderness that couldn't be seen in the lightning. At 7 Pinster Street, Leonard sat on a sofa. He placed his feet on the coffee table and leisurely flipped through the day's newspaper. Yesterday, George III's death had brought them copious amounts of work. He had spent the entire night on duty, and he received 5 hours of rest today. After sleeping for 2 hours, Leonard woke up in high spirits, attempting to understand the current situation from the normal media. In fact, as the captain of a Red Gloves team, he knew more than the reporters about certain aspects. For example, in the outskirts of Backland, where the Tudor ruin was located, it had collapsed into a rather large lake. It had nearly affected Dwayne Dantes' Mager Manor. Another was the death of George III, who had self-destructed at the square, but wasn't the actual person. The search for his corpse was to no avail, as though he had vanished into thin air that night. Of course, Leonard was extremely certain that George III was already dead. The eldest prince was about to inherit the title of Balam Emperor and Lowen King.
Back then, something had happened at Sapphira Castle. This matter definitely has something to do with Mr. Fool. Klein had long warned us about George III. The reactions of the three churches were very strange. Even the Church of the Lord of Storms, which is most prone to acting rash, wasn't too angry.
As Leonard flipped through the newspaper, his thoughts wandered casually. At this moment, his mind was filled with the slightly aged voice of Palez Zoroast, male.
Gehrman Sparrow's messenger is here.
Leonard suddenly looked up and saw the angel-level messenger wearing a dark and complicated long dress appear in front of him. The four blonde, red-eyed heads held by Reinette Tinneker spoke one after another.
Gehrman? Sparrow. Has encountered. Extreme. Danger? He has. Gone. Missing.
Klein has encountered danger and disappeared?
Leonard immediately retracted his legs and stood up. Without waiting for the reminder provided by Palez Zoroast, his spiritual perception stirred as he blurted out,
Is it related to the death of George III?
Yes. He destroyed the apotheosis, ritual, of George III.
The 8 red eyes on Reinette Tinneker's 4 heads looked at Leonard.
Apotheosis ritual?
Although Leonard was anxious, he was still shocked by the phrase.
For someone to hold an apotheosis ritual, one had to be a Sequence 1 angel at the very least. Yet Klein was able to directly participate in something at that level. Mr. Fool's plan?
Leonard's green eyes glimmered slightly. Relying on his relatively rich experience, he pointedly asked,
What happened to Klein the last time you saw him?
The 4 blonde, red-eyed heads of Reinette Tinneker shook and said,
Possibly under Zaratul's pursuit.
As Gehrman Sparrow's messenger, this ancient Bane was able to sense that her employer had also left the Tudor ruins after escaping. And as for those who understood the means of a scholar of yore, they were undoubtedly high-sequence beyonders of the same pathway. Therefore, Zaratul would definitely be able to obstruct and pursue him.
Zeratul? The leader of the secret order, the Sequence 1 angel? Zeratul?
As Leonard was worried about Klein, he felt fear and concern for the life of his former colleague. At that moment, a deep voice sounded in his mind.
Ask her what other clues she has.
Leonard immediately did as he was asked. Reinette Tinneker seemed to know that Leonard wasn't simple. She repeated Queen Mystic's prophecy word by word. After listening to what was said, Palez Zoroast fell silent for a while before sighing.
Error. I think I know about your former colleague's current situation.
Leonard subconsciously wanted to ask, but because there were outsiders around, he held back his urge. Palez paused and continued.
The anomaly with Sephira Castle attracted Zeratul. How could Amo not notice it? This should be related to the struggle for Sephira Castle.
Sephira Castle.
Leonard slowly took a deep breath and said to Reinette Tinneker,
He might have fallen into the hands of Aemon.
After Miss Messenger's 4 heads nodded and turned to leave, Leonard immediately sat down and clasped his hands. Closing his eyes, he prayed.
The fool that doesn't belong to this era.
Chapter 1163, Approaching. Above the gray fog, the crimson star representing the star also burgeoned and contracted. The rippling light gradually overlapped with the other ripples created by the other 3 crimson stars, turning into a tidal wave that surged through the entire mysterious space, causing the space to vibrate slightly. After describing the matter related to Klein, Leonard ended his prayers and waited for Mr. Fool to respond. However, he still didn't receive any feedback after nearly 15 minutes. Leonard couldn't help but mutter.
Mr. Fool has always been very responsive.
After a few seconds of silence, Palez Zoroast reminded with a slightly aged voice,
Recall what the fool said recently.
Leonard thought carefully and slowly said,
In the middle of the week, he reminded us not to head into the woods in the northwestern outskirts of Backland. Yes, he seemed to hint that the gathering might not be held as planned.
Palez Zoroast let out a long sigh and said,
As expected. The fool had predicted Aemon's appearance to a certain extent. They might be fighting in different domains now. One of them wishes to hold on to Sapphire Castle, while the other wishes to become the new owner of Sapphire Castle. Your former colleague has unfortunately been embroiled in this matter.
Leonard's green eyes lit up as he blurted out.
Mr. Fool had expected this? Is this a trap he laid for Eamon?
Pal spent a significant amount of time thinking as he spoke much slower.
Perhaps that's the case. Perhaps it's because Aemon exploited the trap and took the initiative. Don't underestimate a blasphemer, a powerful king of angels.
According to what Leonard knew, Mr. Fool was either the owner of the Sapphire Castle who was slowly recovering, corresponding to some unknown deity in history, or he was the embodiment of Sephiroth. Currently, he was unable to control his authority and strength very well, something that could be fixed with a further qualitative change. And regardless of the possibilities, Mr. Fool was still unable to reach the level of a true deity. He was likely on the same level as the King of Angels. Under such circumstances, it was rather normal that Mr. Fool and the terrifying blasphemer would undergo an intense battle. After all, that person was one of them, one of the strongest hidden existences beneath the deities. He was even more powerful than the hidden sage that was usually categorized as an evil god. Even deities were somewhat apprehensive towards him. Leonard couldn't help to tense up. He asked in a low voice, worriedly,
Old man, do you have any way to provide any help? Isn't Eamon your greatest enemy?
Such help might be limited, but it should be able to pull Klein out of the maelstrom. Upon hearing that, Pala Zoroast laughed and said with an obvious self-deprecating tone,
Aren't you expecting too much from me? Indeed, if Aemon obtains Sapphire Castle, I'll definitely die at his hands. I might not be able to survive this winter. And if Sapphire Castle is left with the Fool, I might have a chance of surviving in the future. But would an old man like me, who has just recovered to Sequence 2, have the ability to interfere with a battle at this level? Even if I were to use the Yesterday Once More charms, what can I do in the short time span of 2 to 3 seconds? Yes. At the critical moment, I might be able to help the Fool warp the situation, but I don't even know where they are fighting. How can I seize the opportunity?
Leonard fell silent after hearing Old Man's long answer. He immediately bowed his head and raised his hands to press them against the sides of his head. He muttered to himself,
Don't tell me that I can only watch helplessly.
Pelez sighed and said,
Be patient. All we can do now is be patient. The Fool and Evernight, and some other deities and kings of angels, seem to have some tacit understanding with each other. They might even be cooperating with one another. They will not allow Aemon to take away Sapphire Castle. Wait patiently. Perhaps it won't take long for a window of opportunity to appear.
Leonard straightened his body and leaned back. He took a deep breath and exhaled.
I understand.
The Blue Avenger, which had been ordered by the Church of the Lord of Storms to attack the port and Phaeacian merchant ships near the waters of Sonia Island, was hiding somewhere outside the safe sea route. Alger Wilson stood behind the window of the captain's cabin, using his extremely distant vision to stare at the long coastline. To this newly advanced ocean songster's point of view, many captains who received similar missions were the cream of the crop of the mid-sequence beyonders. Their joint operation would definitely be able to effectively harm the traffic flow of Phaeacian waters. This also meant that an attack from Phaeac would be reasonably fierce, with a high chance of a Sequence 4 demigod leading the attack. Of course, one couldn't eliminate the possibility of a Sequence 3 War Bishop or Silver Knight appearing. This was a dangerous development for Alger. He didn't wish to put himself in such danger. At the same time, his crew, colleagues, and partners would monitor each other, preventing anyone from deserting. If Alger were to skive and walk on the edge of danger, it wouldn't take long for him to consider killing most of the crew members and become a true pirate, or lose the Blue Avenger and return to Passu Island for an internal probe. After this operation ends, the captains who could still survive wouldn't exceed a third. Alger calmly analyzed the situation and quickly came up with a plan to avoid danger. That was to participate in the operation but not take center stage. Alger planned on using a surprise attack on the port, while his brethren frenetically attacked the Phaeacian merchant and supply ships. This would bring the people on board his ship onto Sonia Island, allowing them to lay in ambush in a primeval forest. Occasionally, he would cause some minor disturbances to the port, which were easily managed. This way, the Faceac demigods would definitely cast their gazes at the sea, and not towards him. At the same time, in the eyes of the crew, he would be a role model who was willing to take great risks to enter the enemy's borders. After thinking through all the details, Alger immediately gathered the crew and repeated his plans. Finally, he emphasized,
"This will be very dangerous. Trust me, it's very, very dangerous. We won't be able to advance and retreat like we can at sea. We might be surrounded by enemies at any time, but such an attack will definitely exceed the expectations of the Phasacians, and it will give us the outcome we want. Are you willing to remain on the ship as cowards, or do you want to follow me into battle as a hero to show your devotion to the Lord?"
The crew members felt their blood boiling as they rashly said,
FCK the Phasacians.
Alger felt relieved as he struck his right fist on his left breast.
"Very good. May the storm be with us."
The sailors saluted and shouted.
May the storm be with us.
After making the necessary arrangements, Alger believed that he needed to borrow the unshadowed crucifix as soon as possible so as to purge the excess ocean songsters beyond her characteristic. Although he had exaggerated the danger of landing on the island, there was still a certain level of danger involved. Therefore, he wanted to quickly recover to his optimal condition. And he had long understood Mr. Fool's earlier hint. He felt that tonight or tomorrow morning, Mr. Fool would officially inform them that the gathering was to be canceled. Of course, there were some ideas in the deepest depths of Alger's heart. He suspected that every time Mr. Fool canceled the Tarot Club, something had happened to him. He wanted to use this prayer to test if this mighty existence was still normal.
"No, I can't. Thou shalt not test God. This isn't a test. Mr. Fool didn't hint that I can't pray to him recently. Besides, borrowing the unshadowed crucifix is something I really need to do within the next few days."
Alger paced back and forth, unable to make a decision. At this moment, he heard the sound of waves crashing. Through the additional type of vision provided by the ghost ship, he saw the water part as a huge fish-type creature appeared. The strange-looking giant fish opened its mouth and spat out a small metal ball that landed on the deck. Alger nodded and expressed his gratitude with his singing. This was a sea creature that the Church of the Lord of Storms had tamed. In this operation, it and its companions were the messengers between the various ships and the islands. Upon receiving his gratitude, the giant fish-like creature trembled. With a flick of its tail, it headed deep into the sea and swam into the distance. Alger looked at it silently for 2 seconds before summoning a gust of wind to bring the metal ball into the captain's cabin. He twisted open the metal ball and took out the piece of paper inside. Alger's eyes froze from a mere glance at it. Alger repeated the content with a heavy expression before recalling the World Gehrman Sparrow's reminder and Mr. Fool's hints.
"George III has been assassinated."
This time, he no longer hesitated. He locked the room and softly muttered the honorific name.
"The fool that doesn't belong to this era."
These prayers are almost becoming a choral symphony. Mr. Hanged Man wants to borrow the unshadowed crucifix from Little Son? Leonard, yes. These voices are stacked over one another, undulating in pitch and volume. It's making the surroundings tremble. Klein rubbed his temples, having a feeling that he had been struck by lightning from every direction. At this moment he followed Eamon deeper into the desolate moors and saw the grayish-yellow fog that blanketed the area. There were a few ravines, and in the deep, dark depths there were plenty of things roaming. Compared to the quiet, lurking monsters from before, the ones here were rather special. The pointy-hatted Eamon raised his hand to nudge his monocle, and pointed ahead with a smile.
Another half a day, and we should be reaching our final destination.
Klein's pupils seemingly dilated.
Half a day. It hasn't been a day yet. Didn't you say 3 days?
Eamon smiled and said,
I said not more than 3 days. 1 day is not more than 3 days, too.
Upon saying that, the King of Angels paused, and asked with piqued interest,
Did I hamper your arrangements? Are you feeling more despair?
Klein didn't answer as he suddenly reached out his hand and grabbed into the void beside him. Chapter 1164, Cheating. Although Klein had been a Beyonder for less than 2 years, his experience could be described as rich and exciting, even among Sequence 4 and Sequence 3 saints. The things he possessed or encountered before that could be summoned from the historical void, and the ones that were capable of quickly killing him didn't number many. Here he chose the flaring sun charm that he had used in Tingen City. He had already recited the incantation, injected his spirituality into it, and was about to activate the charms. Indeed, to a demigod of the seer pathway that meant bizarreness and change, it wasn't very effective against him. He mainly depended on the damage it did to his body, but Klein didn't dodge or defend himself. Instead, he released his body and mind to embrace the light of hope. Even at the level of a Sequence 3 scholar of yore, the defense of a seer pathway's Beyonder remained low. His offensive ability was also equally insufficient compared to his peers. This resulted in a sad fact. When Klein wanted to commit suicide, he didn't have any powers that could quickly kill himself. After all, it was impossible for him to control his spirit body threads and transform himself into his marionette. This would result in logical contradictions. Towards the end of the process, he would lack the ability to continue making himself a marionette. And when he was searching for ways to kill himself through external means, he realized that, as long as he didn't use methods like marionette interchange, paper figurine substitutes, and historical void hiding, there were too many options that he could consider. The seer was such a powerful pathway that veered towards the extremes. Seeing that Klein was about to take out a flaring sun charm from the fog of history, along with having a strong desire to commit suicide, Eamon only smiled. Without even raising his hand, he stole the entire idea, causing the crystal monocle to glow slightly. Klein immediately forgot what he was trying to do, but his actions didn't stop. His shocked reaction when he heard that they were only half a day away from the final destination was mostly faked. This was because he had always been wary of the god of deceit. He didn't trust anything that he said. There were too many interpretations of not more than 3 days, so Klein had long prepared for the worst. After hearing what Eamon said, he immediately arranged the things he needed to do into a sequence. After having the idea of summoning the flaring sun charm to commit suicide, it was to summon that existence. Summon that existence. Summon this, that, and those existences. He made it cyclic, hoping that no matter how many thoughts Eamon stole from him, he would still follow his original plan and perform the corresponding actions. Regarding this matter, back when he dealt with 008, he had been thinking about it above the gray fog. He had used the experience of treating the real him as a marionette and only following a predetermined set of actions. This helped him greatly. At that moment, although he didn't know what he was trying to do, to the point of not realizing that he had forgotten something, he knew very well what he would do next. The past wasn't important, but the present and future were key. Klein reached out his palm again and grabbed the void in front of him. His entire arm sank. However, when he retracted his right hand, nothing came out. At the same time, Eamon raised his palm and gently swiped forward. He had stolen the historical void projection that Klein had summoned. A figure quickly appeared beside Eamon. It was an elder dressed in a hooded black robe. His eyes were deep black, like a dark water surface, and the white beard around his mouth was long and dense. Zaratul, the leader of the secret order, the Sequence 1 angel, Zaratul. The existence that Klein had attempted to summon was actually Zaratul, and he had succeeded in one try. This was because he had made preparations in advance. Back in the city that the Phoenix Believers had built, when Klein had split his marionettes into 3 groups, he was actually attempting to summon Zaratul from the historical void. Without a doubt, it was impossible to succeed at that time. However, as a scholar of yore, it would be a massive failure if one failed to notice that someone else was trying to summon their historical projection. As for Zaratul, he was definitely a senior, excellent, and experienced scholar of yore. After such a failed summoning, Klein had established a connection with Zaratul. This was the tacit understanding between scholars of yore. As for a miracle invoker and attendant of mysteries, he was able to respond to his historical projection. It was just like how a scholar of yore had a 100% chance of success when borrowing strength from his past. In addition, a scholar of yore had no contractual connection with the historical void projection. They relied on the other party's lack of intelligence or them having good relationships with them to control it. And in this world, the few high-level existences most unwilling to see Aman obtain Saphira Castle was Mr. Dor, followed by Pelez, and then Zaratul. In other words, the two of them were short-term allies when it came to resisting Aman. Due to these factors, Klein believed that he could summon Zaratul in one go. And the facts proved that he was right. Waha! And it was precisely because of this that he wasn't worried at all that Aemon would steal away his historical projection that he had summoned. He even hoped that the Angel of Time would do so. As for the reason why he first came up with the idea of committing suicide before summoning Zaratu, it was to let Amun steal his thoughts. And for Aemon, he would be happy to try since he was a king of angels in search of excitement. With too many choices for him to choose from, it was unlikely he would repeat another thought usurpation. It might be the theft of a historical void projection. This was one of the few trump cards that Klein had, Zie. In the next second, Zaratul's gaze turned from a glazed one to a spirited and real one. Clearly, this attendant of mysteries, a senior scholar of yore, had entered the historical void and allowed his projection from the same era to receive his consciousness. And having his own consciousness meant that Zaratul's projection didn't hesitate at all to firmly cast his gaze at Amun. The eyes of Amun, the ones wearing and not wearing the monocle, narrowed at the same time. He saw the lightning around him increase in frequency as the vast wilderness with many ravines instantly turned empty and dark. They were speckled with twinkling stars. He had apparently been pulled beneath the cosmos by Zaratul. This was a miracle. As for the projection opposite of Aemon, it had already transformed into a gigantic, mysterious whirlpool formed by squirming Mysterious. They extended out in all directions with transparent tentacles. Just looking at them would make humans lose their minds and turn crazy. At that moment, Klein abandoned the other thoughts in the queue. He took the opportunity to control a monster deep in the darkness and transform it into his marionette. Immediately following that, he switched places with his marionette. After coming to the depths of the darkness, Klein reached out his hand once again to grab at the air in front of him a few times in succession. His marionette did the same action as well. Bekid. Finally, he dragged a new figure out of the void. It was a figure dressed in a simple linen robe with a tree bark as a belt, standing there, barefooted with long black hair. Ariana's facial features were ordinary, and her eyes dark and cold. The Evernight Cloister's matron, the ascetic leader, the servant of concealment, the grounded angel, Ariana. As soon as Ariana appeared, her dark eyes turned normal. She didn't look like a projection at all. Her true body seemed to have entered a concealed state, allowing the summoned historical void projection to also possess intelligence. This was also one of the reasons why Klein had chosen to summon her, and had given up on summoning Mr. Azik and Miss Messenger, who gave him a higher success rate. This way, even if an accident happened during his suicide, preventing his success, there was still a chance to fight Aemon in the subsequent battle. After a historical void's projection possessed their own consciousness, it made it much easier for Klein to maintain them. This resulted in an extension in time for the maintenance of the projection. Following that, he used a connection between the scholar of yore and their summoned historical void projection, quickly communicating to Servant of Concealment, Ariana, his intent to kill him. Ariana suddenly bent her body, and her right hand reached behind her back. She pulled out a bone sword covered in strange patterns from the depths of the darkness. Then she suddenly took a step forward and swung her sword forward. The entire darkness literally stirred as it wildly spread towards where the spot Klein was standing. An unlucky monster happened to be situated between the two of them as it melted away when drowned by the tide of darkness. Juan Mataili Hero. This wasn't the authority of concealment. This was a combination of repose and horror. It symbolized danger in the darkness, a symbol of silent destruction and vanquishment. The Beyonders of the Sleepless Pathway had to reach Sequence 3 Horror Bishop to grasp such powers. Subconsciously, Klein's survival instinct made him attempt to escape, but at that moment he felt that the surrounding darkness was an enemy. If he was infected by that force, he would become a part of the tide. There was no avoiding it.
There's no need to use all your strength. You can easily kill me with just a portion of your strength.
Klein restrained his primal instincts and he stood on the spot, waiting for the destruction to sweep through him. At that moment, a distant, illusory bell sounded. It was as if it had traveled through a long stretch of history, causing everything around it to slow down, including the surging darkness. In mid-air, swaths of darkness were pierced, revealing a gigantic wall clock carved out of stone. It was ancient and mottled, and its surface was separated into 12 segments by grayish-white and bluish-black colors. Each segment had different symbols, and the needle had a total of 3 hands, short, medium, long. It seemed to be formed from the 12 rings of a worm of time. As the second hand ticked, the bell rang again. Gong! As the sound echoed, the surging darkness like a tide slowed down even more. Then, the ancient clock's projection dissipated, turning back into Aemon with his pointed hat and monocle. Behind him, the projection of Zaratul was also in a sluggish state. Right on the heels of that, Aemon levitated in midair, extending his right hand, and he pressed down at the darkness. The darkness quickly returned to normal, drowning Klein without causing him any damage. It was unknown if there was a bug or if a Beyonder effect had been stolen. At the same time, Aemon's body instantly became abnormally huge. It was nearly 20 meters tall, but none of his clothes suffered any damage. He looked down at Klein and raised his hand to adjust his monocle. He ignored the attacks from the Zaratul projection behind him as he curled his lips and said with deep interest,
Interesting.
Chapter 1165, The Grand Lineup. As Aemon spoke, the transparent tentacles covered with mysterious patterns extended out from the gigantic vortex behind his back, and they wrapped around his many different spirit body threads. In the blink of an eye, the illusory black threads were lifted up without any resistance. And with that, one strange monster after another was hoisted up in the air, like ham waiting to be dry-aged. The spirit body threads beside Aemon were all stolen by him at some point in time. While Zaratul launched his attack, his other slippery tentacle kept extending into the void, attempting to pull something back. In just a few seconds, a figure quickly appeared. He had long chestnut-colored curly hair, blue eyes, high nose bridge, thin lips, and a very beautifully manicured mustache. He wore a dark red coat with rusted golden threads. It was none other than the former Emperor of Intis, Rosel Gustav. The moment this knowledge emperor stepped into the real world, he looked down at the gigantified Aemon, and complicated and illusory symbols instantly formed in his eyes. He wasn't worried that Aemon would steal his attack at all, because he had prepared an extremely large amount of useless, miscellaneous knowledge. Be it the forceful injection or Aemon's the theft of it, he could achieve the goal of blowing up the other party's mind. Just as Emperor Rosel's projection was fully formed, another figure appeared from Zaratul's transparent tentacles. The figure had a young face, but his long hair was already half white, pulled back and flailing in the air. In the darkness, half of it was hidden, and the other was prominent. This was an angel that Klein didn't know. He looked like a man with eyes that were dark and filled with the vicissitudes of life. His facial features were considered pretty good, but there was a bunch of thick, short, black hair on his cheeks. He emitted the feeling that he was both old and youthful, both rational and crazy. He immediately transformed into a cluster of squirming worms that extended out transparent, smooth tentacles akin to Zaratul's projection. Clearly, this was also an angel from the seer pathway. At that moment, Klein didn't even dare to look straight at the situation occurring in midair. However, when his spiritual perception triggered, he had already sensed something familiar. The second angel that was summoned by Zaratul was the son of an ancient god, the original ancestor of the Antigonus family. This was the historical projection him before he became the half-fool. Clearly, Zaratul had made sufficient preparations in this period of time. As Antigonus displayed his complete mythical creature form, the surrounding environment changed once again. The darkness became even darker, as though it had a life of its own as it surged towards the massive manifestation of the classic black-robed, pointy-hatted, and monocled Aemon. In the area enveloped by darkness, all the monsters instantly turned into marionettes. Antigonus seemed to have moved a portion of the ancient divine kingdom from his memories into the real world so as to separate Aemon from Klein. This was also a miracle. When the miracle happened, Zaratul's transparent tentacles pulled out a third projection from the fog of history. This was a knight in full black armor. He was a demigod from the Fourth Epoch's Solomon Empire and had not left an illustrious name in history. However, he had another identity. He was a member of the Red of War army, and the leader of this army was King of Angels Medici. In this division, every member could connect with Red Angel Medici's mind and become one. In other words, if Medici could converge their powers, then they too could also transmit their own powers to the collective pool. The powers of a scholar of your powers couldn't summon anything associated with the uniqueness. Even if they were to raise their sequence and receive a qualitative change, it remained the same. However, there was no doubt that seers would seek ways to push the envelope by attempting to bypass the restrictions and obtain help from the uniqueness to a certain extent. Klein had summoned the goddess's descent vessel to accomplish this point, while Zaratul summoned a powerhouse of the Red of War army. At this moment, that projection was equivalent to a portion of Medici Pera. The knight in black armor stepped onto the battlefield. He scanned the battlefield in a sluggish manner before laughing out loud.
Yo, Lil Raven, have those feathers I burnt recovered?
Due to the fact that his historical projection had summoned another 3 angel-level historical projections, Klein suspected that he couldn't maintain it for 10 seconds. If it wasn't for this change, then he would most likely have felt that he had found a way to indefinitely increase his combat strength. That was to summon 2 angels and 1 projection of himself every time. Then he could use his projection to summon 2 angels and himself again. If this continued, he would have an infinite number of projections available. At that moment, the ascetic leader of the Church of Evernight, Ariana's body faded and entered a concealed state. Following that, she suddenly appeared behind the gigantified Aemon, slashing out with the bone sword that was covered in strange patterns. Taking advantage of the opportunity when Aemon was being attacked by the 5 angel projections, Klein kept converting monsters into his marionettes, getting them to aim at him. He opened his mouth and let out a bang. Air cannons whistled towards him. At the same time, Klein stretched out his hand and easily took out a flaring sun charm that had already been activated and was just short of releasing its effects. He didn't believe that he would be able to survive such repeated attacks. Amidst the booms, Klein suddenly heard a tick-tock noise. The entire world seemed to stop for a moment before it returned to normal. Following that, he saw a huge hole in the dark sky. A ray of pure hot sunlight shone in and lit a golden charm. It was the flaring sun charm. It had turned into a huge ball of light that was engulfed by countless balls of flames. However, the target it attacked wasn't Klein. It had made an error and, instead, wrapped around the Red of War demigod. Meanwhile, the vast amount of knowledge that Roselle Gustav had injected, the miracle created by Antigonus, the destructive sword which Ariana had swung out, the transparent tentacles that Zaratul extended, they all pointed at the same target in an erroneous manner, Medici's black-armored subordinate. At some point, the projection that consisted of a part of Medici's will first suffered an explosion in his mind. Even his instinctive reaction seemed to have disappeared. Then he was assaulted by the barrage of heavy attacks and quickly dissipated in midair. Wearing a pointed hat and a classical mage robe, it was unknown when Aemon had returned to the size of a human and landed at the bottom of the battlefield. He raised his right hand and adjusted the crystal monocle as a beam of light lit up. Behind his back, the ancient modeled clock phantom appeared once again. The longest second hand quickly spun half around at an extraordinary speed. It took less than a second, but everything on the desolate moors seemed to have lost 10 to 20 seconds. The projection of Antigonus's historical projection disappeared. Following that, Roselle's historical projection faded away. Finally, it was the historical projections of Zaratul and Ariana. The amount of time they could be maintained had been stolen. Klein, who was just about to commit suicide for the third time, couldn't believe his eyes. He had expected blasphemer Ammon to resolve the 5 angel projections. After all, they were merely projections. A projection was much weaker than the actual body. However, Klein never expected the other party to be so casual about it that he didn't even have a chance to commit suicide. He had used his trump card in exchange for such an outcome. It was inevitable for him to feel disheartened and despair. Eamon nudged his monocle and took a step forward to appear in front of him. He smiled.
If they were all their true bodies, it would indeed be more troublesome. However, the historical void projection has a very huge flaw, and grasping the problem of something is what I'm best at.
Looking at this angel of time whose smile remained the same while his expression was one of delight, as though he hadn't been in a difficult situation just now, Klein's heart slowly sank, as if he had fallen into an abyss. His spiritual perception was triggered as scenes quickly flashed through his mind. After entering the forsaken land of the gods, Eamon changed his clothes. Going from a dark-colored jacket, trousers, and black top hat that met the aesthetic standards of modern times to a classic mage's robe and a pointed hat. After that, he suggested a game of escaping and obstructing. He appeared extremely confident and wasn't worried about any mishaps. As his thoughts raced, Klein's throat turned dry, and he said in a low and hoarse voice,
You are the true body. After entering the forsaken land of the gods, your true body merged with your avatar?
He seriously suspected that the person in front of him was Eamon's true body. The true blasphemer, the whole king of angels. The corners of the monocled Eamon's mouth curled up bit by bit.
This is very interesting, isn't it? The expression on your face after knowing the truth is what I wanted to see in this game.
He had clearly admitted that he was the main body. He was born accommodating the uniqueness of the Marauder pathway. He was peerless amongst the ranks of those beneath that of deities. This meant that unless a true deity descended, no matter how hard Klein struggled, he wouldn't be able to escape from Eamon's hands. And this was the forsaken land of the gods. The only active deity was the true creator, and he wasn't too interested in Sapphira Castle. Although he had suspected that the Eamon beside him had swapped with his actual body, Klein, who had experienced countless instances of hope, only to have them destroyed, experienced what was the ultimate sense of despair when he was truly certain of it. If it wasn't for the fact that the Tarot Club involved Miss Justice, Leonard, and company, as well as how he knew that Eamon was best at deception, he would have admitted defeat and expressed his willingness to become his blessed. As he lampooned,
Isn't it normal to join the ranks of the opponents if you can't beat them?
a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. He recalled the words that Eamon had previously said.
This.
His eyes lit up, and he completely calmed down. Looking at Eamon, he leisurely stretched his body and said with a smile,
Kill me.